Welcome to this episode of Beyond Day One. We've been thinking and talking what is the essential skill that you need to have in order to be successful? And as we thought about it, we came to one conclusion: communication. Now, I know there's some other skills out there that you would say might qualify for that. And there's some I wouldn't argue about. Maybe there's a 1A and a 1B. But if there's any skill that you have to be successful in today's workplace, it's got to be communication. And tonight, I want to talk about that. I've got with me, as usual, Ryan Holdeman and Philip Rich with me. And we're going to break this down a little bit today and talk about why communication is so important and necessary for your success at work. You know, Ryan, you kind of helped kick this conversation off when you talked about communication a few weeks back as being so critical. And so, one of the things that it occurs to me is that the man or woman who can't communicate who they are, what they want, the vision that they have, the goals they want to achieve, whatever that may be, is always going to be at a deficit to the person who can. In my article, I write about two people, and in that, there's the person who is more knowledgeable but struggles to communicate their plans and vision versus someone who has half the expertise of that person, but is a great communicator that has a way of getting the team connected and able to walk forward together. And that person is more successful than the person that we would consider more experienced. And you know, that happens in office spaces all across the world, that there are people who are just really great communicators. But one of the things that I think it's important to notice is that communication is a skill that you can acquire and grow. You can put it in your toolbox. So let's talk a little bit about why it's so important. Ryan, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about communication in your workplace and in your world. Why is communication so critically important?
Communication is important because it makes sure that everybody's on the same page. And I know that sounds really, really simple, but it's critical because I'll give a great example that happened today. I was invoicing a customer, and it was kind of complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, so I sent it over to a colleague, and I said, "Hey, look at it, make sure it's right." And so when she got to it, whatever, it was a couple hours later, she calls me back and she says, she said, "I love you, right?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I didn't know why she was calling. I actually forgot that I had asked her about it. And she said, "Just so you know, we don't do it this way, like this specific way I was putting this stuff on the invoice. We don't do that anymore." I was like, "Oh, okay. For how long has that been?" She's like, "For 6 months." I was like, "Oh, well, glad somebody told me finally." Um, so it keeps communication is so important because it keeps everybody on the team on the same page. And I know that's incredibly simple, but it's incredibly important because if the disasters of what happens when anyone's on two or three or four or five different pages. When you're in a classroom and you're reading, as a class, and you have people on different pages, you're gonna miss parts of the story, and you're not
Right.
gonna be able to pass the test at the end.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I completely agree. You know, Philip, when we say that communication is the foundation of all of the pro skills, soft skills, you know, when you think about some of the skills that people mention, they talk about teamwork, they talk about leadership and problem solving, conflict resolution, empathy. You know, we talk about all of those skills, but none of those things work without communication. None of them
Absolutely.
do. What's your
That's,
thought?
yeah, communication is basically the lifeblood of any organization. Because if you don't have clarity of communication between all the different departments, all the different levels of management versus the workers and so forth, you can assume a lot. And when there's assumptions happening, as we know the famous saying, I won't say it here, but it can be a hot mess, shall we say, when there's nothing but people operating on assumptions. And I heard it said one time that assumption is the lowest form of knowledge. I believe there's a lot of merit to that, because what you would rather have and what would be way more effective is clarity in communication, to the point where once something is issued out, if it's some type of a directive or some type of a instruction from management or whatever it is, it's a good thing to check with the people that are receiving that communication that they got the signal properly. I know that seems elementary, and it may even seem like overkill, but to a big degree, David, I think that there's really no such thing as over communicating if you want to do it right.
Yeah, I agree. And it is funny that communication in one sense is very simple. You would think it was simple, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a quote that goes something like, the funny thing about communication is that everybody seems to think they're doing it,
Yeah.
and they're not. You
Yeah.
know, and Lori and I are marriage coaches when we're not doing this and our work and our business and stuff with foundations. And we see this in every relationship.
Wow.
Anywhere where you see communication break down or communication not happening, it is impossible for things to move forward. Or let me rephrase that. It's possible for things to move forward, but it creates friction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's friction here, there's misunderstanding there. And before you know it, you have a couple saying we can't coexist together. And you begin to dig into the why, and you begin to realize that the problem is these two people don't communicate well.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the same thing happening in our workplaces. And in so many cases, we have, I mentioned the Gen Z stare, a little bit ago. That will make you wonder if you're communicating with some of your Gen Z employees. But that's an opportunity for you to go in and dig in more and ask questions and discern what level of understanding just happened while that stare was happening at you. What did you just what did you just hear me say?
Right.
It is a
Right.
great question to ask and see if you're on the same page or not. But I tell you, it creates divorce in the workplace.
Wow.
And I just it's such when we part of what started this whole Foundations for Success work that we're doing is this statistic that said 6 out of 10 Gen Z employees were being terminated within the first 90 to 100 days of
Wow.
their working somewhere. And as you look for all the reasons why, communications apart, communications apart, communications apart. Ryan, what do you think um, we can do to start down the path of better communication in our work lives?
I think that you have to create a system that will uh, that will help you know how and when to communicate. And because when work gets crazy, when life gets crazy, when the train is moving really fast, it can be. That's why it's so easy to forget to communicate. That's why it's so easy to forget to communicate to Ryan, hey, the invoicing system, but everyone else in the company knows that it's changed, but one person forgot because he didn't have a system. And the system can be for anybody. The system can be for those that are management, leading a lot of people in the organization, all the way down to an entry level position. Because if you want to move up and you want to be successful, if you adapt a communication system so that you're always communicating and you know when and how and what to communicate, it will help you. I have a great system, and it's called E.C.H.O. E.C.H.O. The E stands for empathize. And when things get stressful, when things are moving, empathy is the first thing to go out the window.
Hmm.
and and you forget, like, I'm so stressful, it's all, and it instantly becomes about me. But empathy makes you think about who, what, where, and when. It makes you think about who needs to know this information now, who needs to, and how do they need to know this information? How is this going to affect other people's workload? How is this going to affect other people's lives? How is this, even going back to what Dave said, how is this going to affect my spouse? How is this going to affect my kids? So E.C.H.O, the first thing is empathy. Then you want to move on to clarify. You want to communicate the what, the when, and the how. And then the more impactful the information is, the more personal it is, the more personal the communication should be. So if it's impactful worldwide, communicate through an email. But if you have to give somebody a pay raise, maybe give them a phone call. If you have to fire somebody, maybe sit down with them in person. So E.C.H.O, empathize, clarify, and then harmonize. What I mean by harmonize is figure out the mode of communication. For quick, simple tasks that everyone's involved in, maybe you're using Microsoft Teams. For a worldwide change in policy, maybe you're emailing, and everyone knows that. Maybe for weekly updates, you've created some sort of dashboard that everyone's communicating on for weekly updates. So harmonize the communication, so you're not always thinking about, well, how do I do it? No, it just becomes, the communication should become automatic. You shouldn't be thinking about the mode every single time you have to communicate. Make it automatic. And just as a pro tip, create some sort of write it down and make it policy on how you communicate. So empathize, clarify, harmonize, and then lastly, own it. This goes back to what Phil said. You have to clarify what you expect people to do. Do you need a follow-up? Do you need them to say, hey, I got this communication. Here are the next steps on what you need to do. So create that system and begin to adapt it to your life so that you never lose communication. Empathize, clarify, harmonize, and own. E.C.H.O.
That's a great analogy, Ryan. I like that. We're going to create a job aid for E.C.H.O that will attach to this particular episode, so you can have that. You can post it up in your cubicle or put it in your office, and you can choose to follow that. Philip, a quick final word.
Yeah, I would just say with communication, Ryan's E.C.H.O acronym was awesome. Just put those things into practice. Put them into practice, and remember that everybody is listening to a certain degree with a filter on. We all filter communications through our experiences, through our perception of life, and those things like that. So do your best to be clear with people. That way, and always, double check and confirm that they received what you said. I think it's important, and never such a thing as too much communication, for sure.
Yeah, that's great, Philip. Well, we're going to be talking about communication over the next couple of weeks, because there are a couple of pieces about it that we think are critical for you to learn. You can follow along with us on our blog, which the link will be below. You can also follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube, or through some of the other social media channels that you can find listed below. Finally, we want to just remind you, we've got a great course out there that's designed to help your young professionals and Gen Zers in your organization to thrive and flourish in your environment. And it's called Beyond Day One: Essential Skills for Professional Success. We cover etiquette, and we cover critical access points, or critical pro skills that are needed in the workplace in order for you to succeed. And one of the important things about that is that it's an opportunity to give your young professionals a leg up, so they start running ahead of the crowd. And you'll be surprised that with simple training, you can change the direction, you can change the outcome of somebody's life through good training, and then good mentorship that will help them to walk it out and to learn and grow in your organization. The description for the Beyond Day One course is below. Thanks for following us, and we are so glad you're here. Until next time, I'm David, he's Ryan, and that's Philip. Bye-bye.